Welcome to Forest FM. My name is Matt McCombs, State Forester and Director of the Colorado State Forest Service.
Today, we're talking about grassland fire. You might ask yourself, why grasslands? As an agency, our priority is stewardship of Colorado's diverse forest environments. Forested systems and grassland systems are fundamentally integrated. So when we look at our wildfire risk, we're going to look at our grassland risk. We've seen an increase in large grassland fires occurring all across the West, but certainly in our state. We saw the Marshall Fire in 2021 that had devastating impacts that we're still dealing with today. The Colorado State Forest Service, alongside our partners, is taking a lead on statewide support for grassland management and fire mitigation efforts. Our conversations have identified a shared need for support, funding, and resources to help Coloradans understand that our wildfire risk isn't just narrowly focused on our forested landscapes, but all across the state, from the mountains to the plains. Given the fast-moving nature of wind-driven fires in the grassland ecosystem, especially in the wildland-urban interface, it's essential that we elevate mitigation resources and education. In this episode, you'll hear from one of our Wildfire Resilience Coordinators who works firsthand with our partners and communities. We'll explore the differences between grassland fires and how they behave differently than forest fires. You'll hear about how Colorado's climate, winds, and mountains all shape grassland conditions, and how we're developing outreach tools specific to grassland fire in partnership with the Southern Rockies Fire Science Network, among many other partners. Above all else, you'll learn how our agency is leading the way on grassland fuels expertise and sharing it with those that can make an impact in their communities. Now is more important than ever to flesh out this unique corner of our expertise in Colorado and make sure that all of our residents have the tools and the information they need to make the best choices for themselves and their communities.
I'm Phil Peterson, a forestry communications specialist, joined today by Janae Coston-Malpas, who's been working closely with our wildfire mitigation staff to develop resources and tools for this corner of fuels management across Colorado.
My name is Janae Coston-Malpas. I am the Northeast Wildfire Resilience Coordinator with Colorado State Forest Service. In general, I provide technical support for wildfire mitigation projects, fuels treatments, collaborations. I also help to develop and disseminate wildfire mitigation resources. But I'd say one of the biggest components of my position really is CWPPs, Community Wildfire Protection Plans.
Community wildfire protection plans bring together diverse local interests to discuss their mutual concerns for public safety, community sustainability, and natural resources.
We provide support really in any way that makes sense for us to ensure that more and more communities are developing CWPPs, that the projects and the collaboration within those plans are well devised. It takes community input. They're taking in science and they're working with partners in adjacent lands. So, we kind of just fill in roles and help facilitate, help provide reviews. We'll serve on the core team if needed. In general, I think provide more assistance and technical guidance to folks in the state on those.
And this technical guidance isn't just limited to forested ecosystems. We're now providing expertise and resources towards grassland fuels management. Before we go any further, let's start by defining a grassland.
Yeah, and that's a great question because grasslands can really be very dynamic. It can actually be a little hard to maybe kind of identify them at times even.
Grasslands are going to be primarily composed of grasses and grass-like vegetation, including sedges and rushes.
In the Front Range, we have what we would consider to be more of a dominant grass ecosystem, but we also, many of our forested systems are also kind of grasslands in many ways.
A quick note on the ecological component as well. At least 80% of grasslands across the planet have been lost in recent years. And these impacts have to do with changes in land use, climate change, and invasive species. We also have altered fire regimes in these areas that have historically seen frequent wildfires. So now we have landscapes that have had fire suppressed and have altered ecological processes and biodiversity as a result. Our grassland ecosystems are changing even faster than our forested ecosystems are.
We really have areas where we think of them more as forested communities, but in some cases it's really encroachment of our ponderosa pine moving into our grassland areas. So in Colorado we have a really complex mix of grasslands, not only in the Front Range but also in other regions throughout our forested communities.
While there's a lot to talk about with grassland ecosystems, today we're primarily focusing on grassland wildfire. And with more fires devastating communities in Colorado, the conversation starts with efforts to protect life safety and critical assets.
And assets would include not only things that we think of like homes and other infrastructure, but would also include cultural and recreational assets. So the assets really pertain to all things that pretty much everyone in Colorado is going to find some value and concern for.
And we need this fuels guidance because grassland fires are so fast-moving and unpredictable.
And that's because environmental conditions like wind and humidity play a big role in grasses, and they can change due to environmental conditions very abruptly. And also geographically in our Front Range area, that's where the bulk of our population lives, is really kind of in mixed fuels, but many of those fuels in that area are grass fuels.
So let's walk through key concepts around grassland wildfire so that we understand what's at stake and how land managers can address the different components. Starting with grassland fuels. Fire science researchers have developed fuel models that consist of classifications like 1-hour fuels, or those that can change rapidly due to moisture conditions.
And these are fuels that are readily ignitable, that can burn very quickly, will ignite very easily, can be known as flashy fuels as well. In Colorado, you can have everything from short grass areas to mixed, and it's another one of those reasons why it can be challenging to, for one, identify fuel models in these areas, because you can have such a mix of vegetative fuels. But it's also really diverse. So this creates difficulties to define our grassland ecosystems. And also, it's very nuanced. A lot of the composition of these type of landscapes really can vary with, again, these little microclimates, these little micro pockets of ecosystems throughout our state. These models help predict fire behavior by considering factors like fuel moisture, type, and structure.
One of the key factors of grassland fires is how they connect other fuel sources together.
And especially since they are so flashy and they are so easily ignitable and can vary in height and composition, they really can help to spread fire in situations where otherwise it may not have been able to spread. Additionally, with grassland fuels, is their rate of spread can be also very dynamic, because they are so susceptible to things like wind conditions, relative humidity, and other environmental factors. So that makes suppression efforts very difficult. That makes evacuation a little more challenging. And it just makes it, in general, a really dangerous environment to be in.
Another key component is landscape topography, and it's important to remember that not all grasslands are flat.
And there's going to be a lot of interactions as well with fire behavior in relation to that topography, which will increase fire behavior in these areas. As dynamic fuels, grasslands can change very quickly with conditions in a short time. So even in a location that maybe had torrential downpouring of rains, if we have some winds pick up and the RH drops, those grasses can be dry within a matter of hours and be highly susceptible to ignition. And in Colorado, it's especially complicated because we do have such varying weather conditions with frequency, and we also do have the winds, which obviously are going to impact our grassland fuels, but also it's going to often dry out our fuels as well at the same time.
As wind travels east over the Rocky Mountains and towards Colorado's plains, this can create an inversion, which is capable of producing hurricane-strength winds.
You can experience high winds throughout the state, but there are pockets in the Front Range that can get exceptionally high. And that's because of these weather patterns, these wind phenomena referred to as mountain waves or downslope winds. And this happens specifically because we have the Rocky Mountains in our state. So our conditions here, it's really hard to maintain a period of time in this state where we really don't have fire risk, because our seasons and our weather is so dynamic. It requires people to, I think, have in some way a connection to where they live and their land.
This effort of understanding how to manage grassland fuels really started with asking questions and understanding what people are doing that's working.
Really what we've been doing is we've been reaching out to land managers in the area to see what challenges they've experienced. We've been inquiring about what treatments and what mitigation measures they've been using that have been successful, not only for mitigation purposes, but also for public perception and ecological goals as well. So a lot of it has been information gathering on our end to start to begin to address what gaps we could help support some information and some guidance on.
As a result of this process, we've partnered with the Southern Rockies Fire Science Network and Great Plains Fire Science Exchange to develop an overview of grassland fuels and mitigation.
And so this overview really it's pulled together with the support of land managers to try to address their questions as well. So that way we could start to provide some uniform guidance for the state on fire behavior challenges for grass fuels that also specifically tie into many of our dynamic and additionally challenging weather patterns in the state. And it's based on best current research and knowledge available.
This guidance is just a foundation of information. The rest comes from knowledge of your local conditions like weather patterns, landscapes, and community goals.
Those types of nuances will alter and impact what kind of strategies and fuel treatments you'll want for that area.
Now let's talk about how we manage fuels in grasslands. The goal of effective fuels management is to alter the structure and the amount of fuels, and to reduce fire behavior while creating access points for suppression efforts and fire management resources.
By reducing these fuel loads and changing the continuity of fuels, which this is especially important in grasslands because they do serve to connect fuels, it can help to protect lives and assets. It can increase evacuation times for residents and communities. And it also ideally will help to reduce extreme fire behavior. Knowing where your values at risk are and other hazards will help further guide strategies on top of knowing and understanding what local conditions are. And it is challenging and it is complex. And I think that we recognize, and everyone hopefully should recognize, that there is no silver bullet. There is no blanket statement that you can use that will say, if we do X, Y, and Z, we will get the outcome that we want. Obviously, our grasses are going to continue to grow, and our vegetative fuels are going to continue to grow, and our climate is continuing to change. It requires us to gather all of the current science and information we have, address a lot of the questions that we have in the state for land managers, for the public. So, these are complicated questions, and it does take a good amount of people to be involved and to collaborate. And that includes especially public input. That's really important. A lot of the times they'll recognize some assets or some biodiversity needs or ecological needs that might not be privy to land managers. So this really is a group effort in order to find balance and harmony with our natural world.
There's a wide range of strategies that can be used to manage grassland fuels.
Mechanical is probably the most commonly known and is also the most easily accessible for most homeowners especially. And this is going to include mowing, weed whacking, haying, raking, things like that. Herbicide treatment is another option that's utilized both by private landowners and also land managers. And this can be part of a vegetative treatment that can target specific vegetation types, specifically usually non-natives, to help reduce fuel load, continuity, and other things like that. Grazing in grasslands, that's a really big topic of conversation. And universally, our grasslands have always had some grazing presence, whether that's through domestic or wildlife. So our grasslands really have evolved with grazing.
Fire is a critical ecological component of grasslands, and reintroducing it to the landscape in a controlled, structured way can be used as a management approach.
It's predominantly going to be the most low-cost and effective management form in our grass landscapes, and it also helps to reestablish other key ecological processes. But it's also really challenging because there are a host of factors that make it complex for location of where it's at. So proximity to values like homes, maybe that, prescribed fire might be a little bit more challenging of a fuel management strategy. It's also, again, with prescribed fire, it's really susceptible to weather conditions. And then smoke management and air quality regulations brings a whole different level of complication into the topic of prescribed fire, especially for the state of Colorado and the Front Range. There are some overarching resource capacity limitations in relation to prescribed fire. And that's why incorporating more of that heterogeneous landscape treatment method into a lot of these areas would be valuable.
Heterogeneous landscape treatments combine a mix of treatments in different areas on the landscape. This can include grazing in one area, mechanical treatments in another, and prescribed burning in another area. It mimics natural disturbance, but it's also just a bit more practical for management efforts.
Because there will be some locations where prescribed fire would be ideal, others where grazing would make more sense, and then for your average Colorado homeowner, mowing and herbicide use is probably going to make more sense. In grassland landscapes, I think there's that misconception maybe that it's all one fuel type, so one treatment method would work. On a smaller scale, when you really look at the landscape, it is going to be wildly diverse, just like our forested systems.
It's important to make a distinction between fuels or vegetative management on a landscape scale versus defensible space, which is focused around protecting homes and properties.
But you really can't successfully do one without the other in a lot of our WUI communities.
Many Colorado communities, especially in the Front Range, are considered to be part of the wildland-urban interface, or WUI.
If we have an ignition in wildland fuels, which would be categorized as a wildfire, with our predominant winds, it very likely might push that fire into those adjacent WUI communities.
In this context, defensible space is everything. This includes home hardening, or being conscious about using non-flammable building materials for your home, as well as removing any fuels touching your home and keeping up with this over time. We covered this in our Live Wildfire Ready campaign, our Home Ignition Zone Guide, and all of our wildfire mitigation resources available on our website. One common and effective way to create defensible space is by creating fuel breaks.
And in grass-dominated landscapes, mowing is the equivalent of a fuel break. So mowing around your house, that's very important. That prevents the flames from being able to make direct contact with your house. So that ties into that defensible space concept. And it also, so it's almost like creating a little mini fuel break around your house.
For more specifics on this, check out our Home Ignition Zone Guide. If adequate defensible space hasn't been created or appropriate measures haven't been taken, the idea of grassland fuel connectivity comes back.
And then once we have structures in our WUI communities that have ignited as a result of these wildland vegetative fuels, we now essentially are looking at urban conflagration.
Wildland and urban fires are going to be really different as far as their behavior, fuels, and suppression tactics.
So again, most structures that burn during a fire ignite because of embers that essentially will create small fires in fine fuels that will then ignite heavier fuels, and that can sometimes be a building.
It's important to discuss these issues with real-life examples. So now we're going to walk through 2 case studies about recent wildfires that occurred when grassland wildfires turned into urban conflagration.
Marshall Fire, that's definitely been a big topic of conversation for folks in the state.
The Marshall Fire started on December 30th, 2021, in Boulder County, Colorado, in the communities of Superior and Louisville.
It started 11 o'clock in the morning when most people had already gone to work. Also, in the dead of winter was not a time frame that most people were anticipating a wildfire ignition. I think it also really is demonstrative of the changing and wide-ranging seasons of fire risk in our state. So the fire actually had 2 ignition sources, and it, thanks to our winds in the Front Range, it very quickly spread east to the town of Superior and Louisville. So the fire had moved well into populated areas.
It burned 6,000 acres and destroyed over 1,000 homes.
This fire specifically started in grassland fuels, and it was fueled by our intense winds. We had gusts of 70 to 100 miles an hour that day. And so with little to no warning, residents were having to evacuate under very abrupt conditions, leaving restaurants and diners. Shoppers were forced to evacuate from shopping stores and getting onto buses in order to leave the scene as quickly as possible.
It's important to recognize the reality of this topic and how in this situation it led to widespread loss of homes and livelihoods.
I think that the Marshall Fire was very much a wake-up call for many residents in the Front Range about their risks in wildfire. And also, I think having folks realize that our wildfire problem is not isolated to our forested systems. It's not isolated to our rural communities. It is very much also an issue for folks in our Front Range and our grass ecosystems. How do we start to go about addressing this now the same way that we've really been kind of working within our forested systems?
The Lahaina fire was part of a series of destructive wildfires in Hawaii, and it started on August 8, 2023, around 6:30 in the morning. It was downed power lines that led to a grass fire, which eventually spread into dense urban areas.
The Lahaina fire had a lot of similarities to the Marshall fire as far as some conditions that mirrored and really kind of paralleled the Marshall fire. For one, they're both on the leeward side of large mountain ranges of a very large slope. And that creates that mountain downslope effect where you'll see very high winds rolling down, accelerating as it picks up speed. In Lahaina, they have a big problem with invasive grasses, and it's really changed a lot of their vegetative fuels structures and components there to become predominantly grasses, which has drastically increased their fire risk across the state. Similar to the Marshall fire, the fire was ignited in fine fuels and dry grasses, and also had high winds that really exasperated, that really created an extreme fire event.
Both of these situations are tragic and immensely complicated from a management perspective.
It's kind of a quagmire of a situation, largely populated areas with grass fuels and high winds. And so we need to do a lot to hopefully try to address some of the mitigation strategies in order to keep people safe and in order to, again, kind of exist in these landscapes in a way that we won't see this extreme fire behavior. And, ecological factors we have to have those in conversations as well. But the number one focus of fuels treatment strategies really should be to protect lives and assets and then kind of work out from there.
Before we wrap up, let's review some resources that are going to keep this conversation going. First, for land managers, keep an eye out for a new publication that has informed a lot of today's discussion. It's called Wildfire Mitigation Practices in Grass-Dominated Landscapes, and it's an overview of fire behavior, management practices, and treatment methods in mixed grass landscapes.
And that'll provide a really great foundation of information on grassland mitigation, fire behavior in the area, and weather conditions for Colorado.
We also have a publication coming out soon called Fire-Resistant Landscaping.
And it has some technical reviews on it. It also has some reviews from homeowners, which is kind of the first of its kind, which I think will be exciting. And it will be followed up later with a technical report that will be more involved and more elaborated upon.
If you're a homeowner that lives in the wildland-urban interface, or you just want to learn more about this topic and how to protect your home and property, visit livewildfireready.org to check out all of our resources on that. Also visit our website to find out if you have a community wildfire protection plan in your area.
Of course, we've got our community wildfire protection plans. So if you're not familiar with yours, my first recommendation would be to see if your community has one. Your HOA might have one, your fire protection district might have one, your county might have one. There might be multiple in your area that you can use and reference, gain more information for specific fire risks in your area. And it also provides a general overview of fire behavior and susceptibility for your community potentially.
Whether you're a homeowner or a land manager, take in local conditions to make your decisions. This guidance is intended to be a general overview.
Listen to, residents in the community, utilize your own reasoning and logic in order to piece this information together. And we also recently hosted a Front Range Grassland workshop in Longmont to start to have the discussion about some of the challenges and some of the barriers and also success stories that land managers have had in managing and mitigating their grassland fuels. But really, we're just trying to continue to develop resources and support for this topic. We're learning along with everyone else, really, and we're just trying to continue to take in the best information and guidance in order to share that with partners and for all of us to just continue to work together to try to change some of these outcomes. No one's really going to come to the table with all the answers. It takes all of us to share and to learn and to grow It's a lovely process to be a part of, to watch the community, to watch agency representatives, to watch nonprofits, to watch everyone come together, because we all care about Colorado, we care about each other, we care about our communities, and we're working together to try to do something really valuable. And then also just a big thanks to all the other partners and subject matter experts. Gloria Edwards with Southern Rockies Fire Science Network, Great Plains Fire Science Exchange, Boulder County, the Watershed Center, and also Boulder County Fireshed Group, Jonathan Henn with CSU, Nate Goker, City of Louisville, Rob Addington with the Nature Conservancy, Alan Gallimore with Colorado State Forest Service, land managers, and also residents that we've spoken to over the last 8 months on many of these topics.
And thank you to you, Janae, for playing such a central role in this process and for taking the time to sit down and share it with us.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of Forest FM. To learn more about the podcast and the Colorado State Forest Service, please visit our website at csfs.colostate.edu. Take care, and we'll catch you next time.